My name is Kala Morgan, and 3 weeks before Christmas, my mother sent me a 6-word text that shattered the already cracked porcelain of our family. You're uninvited from Christmas this year. That was it. No explanation. No context. Number. Apology. Just a digital severance from the only tradition I'd tried to preserve, no matter how distant or difficult things had grown. My thumb hovered over the screen as I sat frozen in my office at 9:03 a.m. on an otherwise quiet Monday. The glow of my monitors backlit my unread emails. Outside the frosted window of my corner unit, London buzzed in December grays and golds. Taxis honked in lazy rhythm. The Thames was already silvered with cold, but all I could hear was the silence of being cut out. It wasn't the first cruel thing my mother had done, but this one felt pointed, premeditated, like a final blow. A knock tapped at my office door. I jumped. "Kala?" My assistant Aisha peeked in. Her soft scarf fluttered as she stepped inside. "Boardroom in 10. Jason just asked if you'd signed off on the Hastings file." "Yeah," I said automatically, throat dry. "It's on his desk." She studied me. "You okay?" "Fine," I lied. I wasn't. But Ashisha didn't need to see that. No one here knew the story behind my tidy suits and reputation as the office's frost queen. No one knew the petty fights, the emotional bruises, or what it had taken for me to claw my way from a 2-bedroom flat in a town no one Googles to the 35th floor of a glass tower with my name on client rosters that opened doors like passwords. They didn't know that growing up, I'd given half my dinners to my sister so she wouldn't cry at night. Or that my mother once told me I had a man's mind but a woman's burden. But being uninvited from Christmas, that was new. That was ... symbolic ... that was war. I made it through the boardroom meeting on autopilot. Jason droned through a pitch deck about Hastings' merger projections, but I didn't absorb a word. Not even when his hand brushed mine beneath the table. I pulled it back like he'd touched fire. He narrowed his eyes. We weren't exactly together anymore, but old habits die hard, especially in suits and whispered corners. At 4 p.m., I canceled the rest of my meetings and went home. My flat smelled of eucalyptus and polish. The city lights blinked like an apology through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I stared at the text again. "You're uninvited from Christmas this year." Underneath it, a blinking cursor begged me to reply. But I didn't, not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into something else. Something ... old. A document I hadn't touched in 6 years. Morgan Residence Lien History. See, what my family didn't know was that the past decade I'd spent working in marketing in London had been a deliberate smokescreen. I did work in strategy, but for a boutique financial acquisitions firm that specialized in distressed mortgages, foreclosures, quiet asset seizures, buyouts. And my parents? They'd taken out a mortgage in 2014 after refinancing the house to fund my sister Kendra's second university attempt. A house that I'd cosigned for when I was 23, back when they guilt-tripped me with, "You're the only one with a real job, Kala." A house I quietly bought the debt for last year. Through a shell firm, just in case. And now it was time to make some moves. I texted my legal team. "Confirm ownership of the Morgan lien. I want all motion to pause until I authorize. Nothing moves until I say." At 7:18 p.m., they replied, "Confirmed. You're holding 76% of the liened value. Foreclosure protection clause active. No activity permitted without your release." That night, I drank mint tea on the balcony in my robe and watched the street lamps paint golden streaks over South Bank. My mother wanted to erase me? Fine, let's see how she liked being frozen. The next morning, I emailed my father, short, direct. "Hi Dad, I heard about the Christmas plans. Just letting you know I've paused all activity on the mortgage until further notice. You should receive a legal freeze notice by Friday. Warm regards, Kala." I attached the legal order. 2 pages, dry. Final dot by 11 a.m., he responded. Calla, what is this? I don't understand. Are you threatening us? Over a holiday? Please explain, Dad. Didn't answer, because it wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. The mortgage in question covered a 6-bedroom home with a pool and a double garage in a suburb where people wore country club memberships like cufflinks. A house that had been my grandmother's before she passed. A house my mother sold emotionally the day after the funeral, only to rebuy it when the market dipped, using my credit. My name, my future. That was the price I paid for keeping the family afloat. And now that they were on their feet, they cut me off. No. Not this time. By Friday, the paperwork arrived at their doorstep. The lien freeze meant no payments could be made, no refinancing attempted, no changes to the deed or ownership, and by law, once frozen, the account flagged pending legal dispute. It would scare them. It was meant to. The call started that weekend. First Dad, then Kendra, then Mom. I didn't pick up. Instead, I sent one final message. I'll be in Surrey from December 24th to January 2nd. If you want to talk, you'll find me there. But this time, the terms are mine. Then I turned off my phone. The days passed quietly. Work kept me busy. Jason cornered me in the lift one night, asking if I was seeing someone. No, I said. He nodded like that answer should have thrilled him. But it didn't. On the 23rd, I packed a bag and drove to Surrey. Not the family house, of course. I stayed at an inn overlooking the downs. The fields were quiet, clean. Snow dusted the fences like icing sugar. Booked the honeysuckle suite. It felt ironic. Or maybe just indulgent. On Christmas Eve morning, there was a knock at the inn door. I opened it to find my mother on the porch, wrapped in a camel coat, cheeks flushed with the cold. You froze our house, she said, voice low. Our home. You erased your daughter, I replied. We stood there, mirror reflections of old wars. She stepped inside without asking. Sat on the velvet chair like she owned the air. You always took everything. So personally, Calla. And you never took anything personally enough. You could have talked to us. You texted me a sentence. Not an invitation. Not even a phone call. It was Kendra's idea. She said it would make things easier. Easier for who? She looked down. She thought your job would make you busy. I laughed. Once, cold. You mean the job that bought your damn house? She flinched. We never asked for that. No, you just let me sacrifice my 20s for it. There was silence. I stared at her. My mother. The woman who had once combed my hair with loving fingers and told me stories from her girlhood in Yorkshire. But she wasn't that woman anymore. Or maybe I was the one who'd changed. You have a choice, I said. You can take responsibility. We can start over, but that house stays frozen until then. And next year, you don't send texts, you make a call. She looked up, Calla. But I turned away, because it wasn't about being cruel. It was about being clear. And this year? Christmas belonged to me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. It felt like the whole world held its breath as snow fell in soft heaps against the frosted window pane of my honeysuckle suite. Christmas morning crept in on silent wings, bringing pale light across the downs. I lay under the down duvet until the delicate ring of church bells in the distance reminded me where and when I was. I dressed in layers, pulling on a woolen turtleneck under my cashmere coat, though the chill still bit through the collar. My phone lay silent on the knitstand, deliberately powered off. No messages from home. No regrets. No signs that the world outside respected my carefully wrought boundaries. I padded barefoot to the window and watched as the snow drifted over the inn's hedges, transforming motions of daily life deliveries, morning joggers, into ethereal movements in a silent winter tableau. The distant rooflines looked like sugar-dusted pastries. And I closed my eyes, letting the serenity seep into my bones. But peace was a mirror. It revealed as much as it reflected. My hand curled around the porcelain teacup on the bedside table. Mint tea again, though I craved something stronger, like espresso with a shot of bourbon. Instead, I sipped gingerly, letting the steam fog my glasses. I recalled my mother's face on the porch, eyes rimmed red, coat damp against the frost, and felt an unexpected ache, because underneath it all, she was still my mother. I dressed quickly, then ventured downstairs, each step on the creaking floorboards echoing through the vacant hall. The inn's common room smelled of pine and cinnamon. A fire crackled in the hearth, and on a long oak table, a spread of pastries and preserves invited guests to linger. But I was alone. In the corner, an elderly couple whispered about local legend that centuries ago, shepherds would pray for safety in these fields on Christmas morn. They spoke of lost letters frozen in time in the church register. I imagined a small snow-swept chapel, its steeple bowing beneath the weight of winter. But I wasn't here for legend. I was here for history. History. I was writing on my terms. Picking a seat near the hearth, I extracted my laptop from my tote, because business never truly rested. A draft email lay open, addressed to my legal counsel. Proceed with finalizing the refinance hold. Ensure they cannot bypass the freeze by end of business December 31st. No exceptions. My fingers hovered over the keys, poised to hit send. But then I paused, recalling the firmness in my father's email, the trembling resolve in my mother's eyes. Had I gone too far? Was this a misstep in a larger game? It felt like the whole world held its breath as snow fell in soft heaps against the frosted windowpane of my honeysuckle suite. Christmas morning crept in on silent wings, bringing pale light across the downs. I lay under the down duvet until the delicate ring of church bells in the distance reminded me where and when I was. I dressed in layers, pulling on a woolen turtleneck under my cashmere coat, though the chill still bit through the collar. My phone lay silent on the knitstand, deliberately powered off. No messages from home. No regrets. No signs that the world outside respected my carefully wrought boundaries. I padded barefoot to the window and watched as the snow drifted over the inn's hedges, transforming motions of daily life deliveries, morning joggers, into ethereal movements in a silent winter tableau. The distant rooflines looked like sugar-dusted pastries, and I closed my eyes, letting the serenity seep into my bones. But peace was a mirror. It revealed as much as it reflected. My hand curled around the porcelain teacup on the bedside table. Mint tea again, though I craved something stronger, like espresso with a shot of bourbon. Instead, I sipped gingerly, letting the steam fog my glasses. I recalled my mother's face on the porch, eyes rimmed red, coat damp against the frost, and felt an unexpected ache, because underneath it all, she was still my mother. I dressed quickly, then ventured downstairs, each step on the creaking floorboards echoing through the vacant hall. The inn's common room smelled of pine and cinnamon. A fire crackled in the hearth, and on a long oak table, a spread of pastries and preserves invited guests to linger. But I was alone. In the corner, an elderly couple whispered about local legend that centuries ago, shepherds would pray for safety in these fields on Christmas morn. They spoke of lost letters frozen in time in the church register. I imagined a small snow-swept chapel, its steeple bowing beneath the weight of winter. But I wasn't here for legend. I was here for history. History. I was writing on my terms. Picking a seat near the hearth, I extracted my laptop from my tote, because business never truly rested. A draft email lay open, addressed to my legal counsel. Proceed with finalizing the refinance hold. Ensure they cannot bypass the freeze by end of business December 31st. No exceptions. My fingers hovered over the keys, poised to hit send. But then I paused, recalling the firmness in my father's email, the trembling resolve in my mother's eyes. Had I gone too far? Was this a misstep in a larger game? I stared at the draft, weighed my options. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement by the fireplace. A man in a tweed jacket rose from a table, inkstone in hand. He placed a folded letter into the hearth. The flames caught it, and the parchment curled into ash before my eyes. Those ancient pages had burned. Lost forever. My chest tightened. I closed my laptop, stood, and moved to the hearth. I crouched, sifting through the last handful of embers with trembling fingers. What had I lost by cutting ties so ruthlessly? Memories, maybe. Forgiveness, perhaps. Or the chance at a Christmas morning I'd always longed for as a child. Stockings by the fireplace. Laughter carols. The ember sifted between my fingers, then slipped away, cooled to a dull gray. I let it fall. I straightened, brushing ash from my jeans. Decision made. I strode out of the common room and into the crisp morning air. The gate creaked as I passed, and I inhaled deeply frost-dry oxygen that burned the back of my throat like a promise. A black Range Rover was parked by the entrance, engine idling. Behind the wheel sat a man I recognized. Elliot Mercer, my contact at the firm that facilitated these transactions. He'd flown in last night, under the radar, to finalize the paperwork in person. I walked to the passenger side and slid in. "Morning," he said, voice low. "All signed." I nodded, barely glancing at the thick folder on the seat. "Good. Wait." I turned to him, eyes sharpened by frost and determination. "What is it?" He tapped the folder. "They filed a counterclaim." My heart skipped. "On legal freeze?" He exhaled. "Yeah, pointing to rights of heirs, claiming you acted in bad faith to punish them on a family matter. It complicates things." I felt anger rise like heat in my chest. "Complicates how?" He shook his head. "Court could mandate bond posting or temporary payment resumption until suit resolves. That means mortgage company could demand full balance or foreclose if they don't see collateral." Silence pressed against me. "We need to act," he said. "Fund the bond or withdraw." I looked out at the snow-tipped hedges. My mind raced. Bond posting could cost hundreds of thousands. Money I'd earmarked to expand my acquisition portfolio next quarter. Funds that couldn't freeze for the holidays. "No," I said, "we're not retreating." "Then, find the unpaid heirs clause." My tone brooked no argument. "Use every loophole. I want motion hearings on January 2nd. I need a win before the new year." He hesitated, then nodded. "You're sure?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the season settle on my shoulders. "I have to be." We sat in silence as the engine purred. Snowflakes drifted against the windshield. Behind me, the inn vanished into a cloud of white. This winter storm, both outside and inside, was only beginning. Christmas. Morning turned into afternoon. And by twilight, I found myself walking along a frozen path overlooking a small river. Icicles spelled out their own language on slate-gray rocks. A bench offered vantage. I sat, clasping gloved hands as if they anchored my resolve. I replayed every conversation of the past days, the curt text, the legal freeze, my mother's apology. That wasn't an apology, and realized how desperately I hungered for more than vindication. I wanted closure. To reclaim not just money or leverage, but dignity. A hush fell. A lone robin hopped by, bright against the gloom. I watched it until it disappeared into the drift, then rose. Tomorrow, I would face the courtroom dot, and when that door opened, I'd be ready. Clutched in one hand was a folded note from the innkeeper. "Dinner at 7, Suite 12. In the other, a summons. Court date January 2nd at Guilford County. I tucked both into my coat pocket and walked back toward the inn, footsteps muffled by the snow. Because this Christmas wasn't about gifts or goodwill. It was a reckoning, and I wouldn't back down. The days between Christmas and New Year passed like the cold itself, slow, sharp, and crystal clear. There was no tree in my suite, No music beyond the wind brushing across the inn's rafters. But there was something else, something purer. A silence I could shape with intention. A focus I hadn't known I was missing. Spent my mornings reviewing the financials, my afternoons coordinating strategy with Elliot and our legal team. And every evening, I walked alone beneath the wide Surrey skies, frost snapping under my boots. Thinking about the girl I used to be, the one who always tried to earn a place at the table, even if it cost her the seat. No more. By December 30th. I had my paperwork ready. The court documents were filed electronically at 6:47 a.m. I included a full audit of the loan transfer, proof of legal authority, and a detailed breakdown of every payment I'd covered on their behalf. It was 29 pages long, but my favorite line sat square in the middle. Petitioner seeks no damages, only recognition. That afternoon, I received a text from my sister. "Kendra, what are you doing, Kala? Seriously. You're going to ruin everything." I stared at the message, fingers hovering. Ruin everything? I didn't reply. Instead, I called Elliot. "Did you find it? The unpaid heirs clause?" "We did," he said. "But there's a snag." "Of course there is. Technically, you fall under that clause. But because you cosigned voluntarily, their lawyer is arguing it invalidates your right to contest based on emotional exclusion. They're painting it like a power grab." I closed my eyes. "What are our options?" "You can escalate and make a case on fiduciary neglect, that they misused your credit with deceptive intent. But it'll be messy. You'll have to show that they relied on your success while simultaneously cutting you out." I exhaled. "That's exactly what they did. You sure you're ready to say that in court, on record?" "Yes." There was a pause. Then Elliot said, "Get ready. They've just hired a barrister. One I know. Brilliant, cutthroat, and expensive." I smirked. "Then they must be scared, or desperate." New Year's Eve fell on a Sunday. The inn was quiet, save for the murmurs of guests getting ready for local celebrations. I had no such plans. Instead, I wore a thick cable-knit sweater, poured a glass of wine, and stared out the window at the last sunset of the year, in the fading light. The world looked untouched, like it hadn't decided yet what kind of year to be. I picked up my journal, the one I'd started the night I left London. Flipping through the pages, I found an entry from years ago, one I'd written after my first loan deal. "I keep thinking success will make them love me more. Maybe it'll just make them more creative in how they take from me." The handwriting was neater then, younger. That night, I added a new line beneath it. "Maybe love isn't something you earn by saving everyone. Maybe it's something you protect by saving yourself." At midnight, the downs lit with distant fireworks. I watched them bloom and disappear. And I didn't make a single resolution, because I already knew exactly who I was. January 2nd arrived. Crisp and clear. Court was set for 9:30 a.m. at Guildford County Hall. I dressed with precision, slate gray wool slacks, a navy blouse, and my late grandmother's brooch, a silver hawthorn pinned to my coat lapel. My heels clicked across the marble floor as I entered the courthouse with Elliot at my side. Inside, the room was hushed. Rows of wooden benches, a clock that ticked too loudly, a judge who wore his years like an invisible robe heavier than the one on his shoulders. My parents were already seated. My mother's hair was pinned back tightly. Her lips were pursed in that familiar line that said, "You embarrassed me." My father avoided my eyes. Kendra sat between them, her arm looped protectively through Mom's. Her look wasn't angry, it was pitying. As if I was the one who'd burned a bridge, but I wasn't here for them. I was here for the truth. The judge cleared his throat. "Ms. Morgan, you are the petitioner in this motion. You've filed to uphold a lien freeze on the property in question due to alleged fiduciary abuse. Is that correct?" I stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Please proceed." I took a breath. And then I told my story. I explained the timeline, the refinance, the promises, the debts I covered, the silence that followed, the text that severed me from the one tradition I had left. I spoke not as a lawyer, but as a daughter. As a woman who had been used, then discarded. As someone who no longer wished to be silent. Their barrister cross-examined. He tried to paint me as vindictive, ambitious, a career woman incapable of understanding family dynamics. "Do you not think," he said, smoothing his tie, "that your actions are excessive for a family disagreement? Is safeguarding your life's work excessive?" I asked calmly. "Is asking to be treated with the dignity I extended for a decade too much?" The courtroom was silent. He turned to the judge. "She froze a family home over a holiday." I turned to the judge, too. "They froze out a daughter who bought them that home." And then I sat down. The judge called recess. As we stood in the hallway, I felt someone approached. My father. He cleared his throat. "Calla, I didn't know about the ownership or how you felt." "Because you didn't ask." His face crumpled, just for a moment. "We were wrong. You're right. You deserved better." I nodded. "I still do." Behind him, my mother stood frozen. Kendra held her hand. I didn't walk over. I didn't need to, because I'd already said everything that mattered. That afternoon, the judge ruled in my favor. The freeze would stand. Ownership confirmed. And the court formally recognized that the mortgage had been acquired legally and that my interests had been neglected as a cosigner and lender. That my mother didn't look at me as they left. Kendra did. Just once. Her face was unreadable, but I walked out into the cold sunlight without regret. Elliot clapped my shoulder as we reached the parking lot. "That was brave." "No," I said, opening the car door. "It was overdue." And as we drove through the winding country roads back toward the inn, snow beginning to fall once more, I felt something unfamiliar settle over me. Peace. But the story wasn't over. Not yet, because the phone that buzzed in my coat pocket would unravel everything I thought. I understood that the message simply read, "Calla, it's Kendra. We need to talk. Now. Before it's too late." The message from Kendra came just as we passed the last row of frost-bitten trees lining the outskirts of Guildford. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Not because she'd reached out, but because of the urgency in her words. "We need to talk. Now, before it's too late." I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I read it again and again as Elliot glanced over, brows furrowed. "Something wrong?" I shook my head, then nodded. "My sister, she wants to meet." "After all that?" "Exactly." He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes said everything. This wasn't just an olive branch, it was something else. And I couldn't ignore it. I texted her back, "Where?" The response came instantly, "At Mum's. Come alone." By the time I pulled into the driveway of the house I'd nearly put into full legal lockdown, the light had shifted. The sun hovered low, painting the facade of the house in dusty gold. Funny how it still looked like home. Even after everything. The hedges were overgrown. The wreath on the front door sagged. And yet, that old stoop still carried the ghost of our childhood chalk drawings, scraped knees, late-night stargazing. I exhaled, pushed open the gate, and climbed the steps. The door opened before I could knock. Kendra stood there, face pale, eyes too wide. "Thanks for coming. What's going on?" It's Mum. She collapsed this morning." The words slammed into me. "What?" "Stress, they think. Heart arrhythmia. She's stable now, but it shook us." I stepped inside, heart pounding. The familiar scent of the entry cedar polish and old carpet hit me like a wave. Why didn't anyone call? Dad tried. "You had your phone off." I hadn't turned it back on since the courthouse. "She's resting in the living room," Kendra said quietly. "She wanted to see you." The house was dim, lit by the muted glow of a few table lamps. I followed her down the hallway, every step echoing in a place I once knew like a second skin. And then I saw her. My mother, curled under a knitted throw, looking smaller than I remembered. Her hair, still pinned, had lost its tight precision. Her lips were pale. She opened her eyes as I entered. Calla. The sound of my name broke something in me. I'm here. She gestured weakly to the chair beside her. I sat down, suddenly unsure of every decision I'd made over the past 2 weeks. I wanted ... to say I was wrong. I didn't speak. I thought if I pushed you away, it would hurt less when you left. You were always ... too sharp for this place. Too independent. I swallowed hard. So you punished me for it. Her eyes closed for a beat. I did. You made me pay for everything. Then acted like I owed you more. I know. She reached out, her hand trembling. I took it. It was cold, but real. I don't know how much time I have, she whispered. But I didn't want to waste what's left by being proud or cruel. Kendra hovered in the doorway, silently crying. I looked between them. What do you want from me now? My mother inhaled. Deeply. To come home, not as a wallet, not as a sacrifice. As our daughter. The silence in the room expanded until I could hear every creak in the walls, every breath, every unspoken apology. I can't forget everything. No, she said. But maybe we can forgive. I didn't know if I could. Not yet. But in that moment, with her hand in mine, I wanted to try. We talked for hours about childhood, about Grandma, about how hard it was. For Mom after her death, how grief curdled into resentment, and how my success became a mirror she couldn't look into. And Kendra? She finally admitted that the Christmas disinvitation was her idea. I didn't think it would matter so much, she said. You always seem so above it all, I laughed bitterly. No one's above being excluded. Dad joined us later carrying tea and looking older than I remembered. I've made a mess of things, he said, voice low. We both have. We sat around the hearth that night like strangers learning how to be family again. And for the first time in years, it wasn't performative. It was painful, but it was honest. The next morning, Mom was taken back to the hospital for tests. I stayed behind, sitting alone in the kitchen. The walls still bore our childhood drawings beneath new coats of paint. I found an old note tucked behind the spice rack, yellowed with age. Calla Math Club meeting today. Don't forget your lunch. Love, Mom. I held it like a relic. Proof that she had tried once. Maybe she still could. My phone buzzed. Elliot, you okay? Sort of. Things just shifted. Want me to pause the next filing? I stared at the kettle on the stove. The same one. Mom used to sing to when she thought no one was listening. Yeah, I said quietly. Pause everything. For now. Because for the first time in years, the warmth in this house wasn't just from the radiator. It was something else. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe hope. But I wasn't letting my guard down completely. Because just as I walked to the front door to clear my head, I found an envelope on the mat. Unmarked. Inside was a single photo of me, taken from outside the courthouse. The back read, "You think they're the only ones who betrayed you?" Snow fell in silent sheets as I crossed the driveway toward Mom's car, the photo clenched in my fist like a hot coal. Its message clamored in my mind. You think they're the only ones who betrayed you? Betrayal, the word echoed, rebounding. Off the hedges and into my chest. Who else could be watching? And why send this now, when everything was finally shifting? I paused, breathing out a plume of frost. The house behind me held echoes of laughter, tears, arguments, and reconciliations. Every fragment of a childhood that felt both familiar and distant. My family had hurt me, yes. But now someone else had cast a shadow across our fragile peace. The photo was crisp, dated January 2nd, outside Guilford County Hall, the moment I rose from the bench after the ruling. I was unaware of the camera. Shock and relief shone on my face. Looking at it now felt like staring at my own undoing. I slipped the photo into my coat pocket and climbed into the passenger seat of Mum's car, which Kendra had moved closer to the front steps. She slid behind the wheel, hands trembling on the steering wheel. "What now?" she whispered. I exhaled. "We find out who sent it, and why." Through the windshield, the inn silhouette trembled against the storm. The world beyond Surrey's hills felt uncertain. I had resolved the legal war with my family, but another conflict had begun. Back at the inn, I called Elliot. He answered on the second ring, voice low. "What's happening?" "I need surveillance. On the courthouse, the inn, everything. Find out who's tailing me. Already on it. And check my phone logs." He paused. "Kala, this is moving fast." "Yes." "You sure you want to start another battle before the dust settles?" I didn't hesitate. "They want to play games?" "Fine, I'll play back." I hung up. Adrenaline thrummed in my veins. Betrayal had many faces. I spent the next few hours reviewing the inn's CCTV feed on a portable drive Elliot sent. At first glance, it showed nothing beyond guests arriving and departing. Until 2:13 p.m. on January 2nd, a shadowy figure in a dark parka paused outside the courthouse entrance. The angle was grainy, but unmistakable, a gloved hand slipping a sealed envelope through the mail slot. Then the figure melted away into the crowd. They hadn't followed me to Surrey, though. The timestamp matched the filing, not the letter's arrival. Someone had sent the photo from the very day I won in court. That meant they had eyes in London. My phone vibrated. It was a news alert. Local financial strategist wins landmark family lien case. I stared at the headline, exploitative, sensational. My face was plastered across the screen in mugshot format. Determined, vulnerable. Whoever had leaked that could have sold it to any outlet. But this, personal. I closed the laptop and looked at the innkeeper's note reminding me of dinner at 7. A small card lay beside it. The station menu. My hunger vanished. By evening, the fire in Suite 12 had burned low. I rehearsed what I would say when facing my adversary, whose identity remained unknown. Reflection in the window showed a woman poised between triumph and vulnerability. At precisely 6:45 p.m. There was a knock. I opened the door to find a courier. Plain jacket, urgent air. He handed me a sealed envelope with no return address. Inside, a single sheet of legal paper. Notice of inquiry. Regulation 42. The unauthorized disclosure of public records. Investigation has been opened into the release of court documents and personal data. A regulatory probe? I sank onto the velvet armchair, mind racing. So not only was someone framing me, they were calling regulatory authorities into play to discredit me professionally. The story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. I gathered the papers, stacking them neatly. Someone wanted me cornered, but I refused to be trapped. The next morning, I arrived at London's regulatory headquarters. My palm pressed against the cool marble facade, the letter heavy in my coat pocket. It was one thing to fight a family, another to battle faceless institutions. Inside, I found the inquiry office, a small windowless room with a single desk. A middle-aged investigator looked up. Double quotes, "Ms. Morgan?" "Yes." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit." I did. "You're under investigation for unauthorized disclosure of court documents and personal data." I blinked. "I didn't leak anything. I have documents showing I sought confidentiality." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were published copies of my legal filings, complete with redacted sections that matched the ones I had sealed. But someone posted them online. UNRED, My heart pounded. Whoever did this accessed sealed transcripts, Ms. Morgan. That's a criminal offense. I leaned forward. "I demand to know how they obtained them." He regarded me. "We're investigating. But if we establish these came from your counsel's files, you'll be in breach of professional conduct." The weight of the accusation settled on me like the thick winter coat I wore. I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about ruin. And I was running out of time. Later, back at the inn's common room, I gathered my team via video call. Each face on the screen wore a look of concern. "We need an origin point," I said. "IP addresses, mail drop, everything." Elliot nodded. "I've traced the digital leaks to a private server in the city. And the envelopes. They were dispatched from a PO box under an alias." My pulse quickened. "Which alias?" he typed. "Jonathan Firth." I closed my eyes. Firth, former partner at the firm who left under a cloud 3 years ago for alleged embezzlement. He'd wanted a bigger slice of our acquisition deals. We parted ways bitterly. I'd litigated to freeze his stake, he'd been sidelined. But was he seeking revenge? I pressed. "Where is he now?" Elliot hesitated. "No fixed address, but registered a company in Panama last month, a shell for cross-border litigation." A headache bloomed behind my eyes. "Then we bring the fight to him. Coordinate with the regulator. Ensure they uncover the leak's true source. And prepare to file suit for defamation and breach of confidentiality." There was a pause. Then the team sprang into action. As the call ended, I stared at the fading daylight through the frosted windows. One man. One target. But the winter night stretched long and cold before me, and I had to decide, strike first, or be struck down. I rose from the table and walked onto the snow-dusted terrace. The lights of the inn glowed behind me like a beacon. I inhaled, then exhaled, and prepared to return fire. The question wasn't whether I'd win, it was how far I'd go to protect what was mine, and the answer would come with January's next dawn. The first light of January peeked through the frost-lined windows of Suite 12, glinting across the snow like truth too bright to ignore. I woke before dawn, heart pounding, mind racing through the events of the past 48 hours. Firth, Jonathan. Firth, the disgraced ex-partner, had surfaced from the wreckage of his own downfall to drag me into a battle I thought I'd won. But this was no longer just about family or finances. This was about survival, reputation, power. I dressed in dark layers, methodical as armor, charcoal slacks, a black turtleneck, and the silver hawthorn brooch pinned close to my heart. My phone buzzed. Elliot's check-in. Server logs show Firth's IP inactive since yesterday afternoon. He's gone dark. At least that confirmed he knew I was onto him. But where was he now? Panama? Some Caribbean island? No, he'd stayed within striking distance, managing assets through proxies. The question was how to flush him out without exposing my own vulnerabilities. I poured strong coffee into a thermos, slipped on gloves and a wool coat, and headed downstairs. The inn's common room was empty, the hearth cold. I set the thermos on the counter and caught the innkeeper's eye. She nodded, understanding. No questions. Outside, the courtyard was blanketed in snow. The air smelled of pine and distant smoke. I inhaled deeply and dialed my private investigator Ruiz. "Find Firth," I said before he greeted me. "I want locations, associates, financial flows. And I want proof he's feeding info to the regulator." He paused. "You're going to push him hard. I need to know his next move before he makes it." "Understood." I hung up and stepped into the cold. My boots crunched across the courtyard as I made my way to the Range Rover parked by the hedge. Elliot was already there, coffee in hand. "Morning," I said. He nodded. "I've briefed the regulator's liaison. They've opened an expedited review, should have preliminary findings in 48 hours. "Good," I paused. "But I want then to see Firth's signature on this." He flashed a half smile. "I have the letterhead and metadata to back you up." That was the difference between a good strategist and a great one. We got in and headed for the city where the gray light and steel facades glowered in accusation. My office was in a discreet tower near Bank Junction, a place where whispered deals could reshape nations. Behind glass walls, I felt both exposed and invincible. Inside, my team gathered: Ruiz the investigator, Marisol the digital forensics expert, and Henry the PR specialist who kept reputations intact or obliterated them. Addressed them without preamble. Firth has gone dark. He's using proxies in Panama and at least one private shell company in the city. He's behind the data leaks and the regulatory probe. I want us to strike first. Marisol tapped her tablet. We've traced some of the leaked digital documents to a compromised endpoint at his former home computer. Could have been through a phishing exploit. Once we confirm the breach vector, I said, we'll present it to the regulator. They'll see it was malicious, not from our counsel. Next, we file criminal charges for unauthorized access and defamation. Ruiz, get me physical addresses and location intel on Firth. Henry, prepare a press statement. Petitioner found innocent. In family lien case. Sabotage attempts uncovered. Investigation ongoing. Henry frowned. That's bold. Might spark media frenzy. Good, I said. We'll control the narrative. No more playing defense. For the next 2 hours, we worked in quiet intensity. Every decrypted packet, every scanned ledger, every contact traced was another piece of the puzzle. By midday, Ruiz reported back. Firth's in London. He's staying at a serviced flat near Holborn. He registered under the name Jonathan Kingsley, same initials, different surname. Security cams show him meeting a courier at Berkeley Square yesterday afternoon. I leaned back. Courier? He's working with an intelligence broker, a fixer. They specialize in leaks for Black Ops corporate warfare. Corporate warfare. The phrase lacked romance but carried weight. So he's orchestrating a campaign, I said. Leaking court documents, planting evidence, dragging me through regulatory mud, all to discredit me before our next big acquisition. He wants me out of the game, Marisol nodded. We can trace the broker. They leave digital breadcrumbs. With enough cross-correlation, we can identify him. Henry tapped his phone. And I've drafted a counter-release, pending review. Misleading data is being circulated by unknown third parties. It's a shield and a sword. I looked at the faces around me, my team, my allies. Then let's set the trap. Step 1. Feed Firth disinfo. Drop an op-ed praising my oversight of the firm's compliance protocols and hint that I have evidence against a rogue partner. He'll bite. Already drafted, Henry said. Step 2. Alert the regulator with certified logs showing where the leaks originated. March them to our side. They'll want to punish the violator. Coordinated, Elliot confirmed. Step 3. I continued, voice low. We serve Firth with papers. Defamation, breach of confidentiality, conspiracy. Personal and professional ruin, but only after we have him in our sights. And capture the fixer, Ruiz added. He'll be the smoking gun. We moved like soldiers planning a siege. And as I watched them work, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Confidence. Late afternoon. I sat in Henry's car outside the flat on High Holborn. The winter sky was a dull canvas. Inside, Henry adjusted the live stream of his press team drafting copy. Your statement goes live at 5 p.m. At 6 p.m. the regulator issues a notice that they've identified malicious leaks from a third party and will clear your name pending investigation. I nodded. Then we wait for Firth to react. Storm before the calm, I murmured. Henry's phone buzzed. You're on. I took a deep breath and stepped out into the chill. Cameras flashed as I approached the podium Henry had arranged in front of the firm's London office. Reporters jostled, expecting scandal. I stood tall. Good evening, I began. I want to address recent reports regarding my family lien case. I have cooperated fully with the Guildford County investigation and welcome a parallel inquiry by regulatory authorities into alleged leaks. Preliminary findings indicate malicious intent by unauthorized parties seeking to tarnish my reputation. I remained confident in my integrity and the truth. "Thank you," the flashbulbs popped. I turned and walked away, posture unwavering. Back in the car, Henry exhaled. That was perfect. I allowed a small smile, but the battle's lines were drawn. At 6:02 p.m., my phone pinged. A directive from the regulator. Inquiry into unauthorized data release has identified IP addresses traced to a location near Berkeley Square. Ms. Morgan is exonerated of any wrongdoing pending further investigation. Victory? Maybe. Yet less than 10 minutes later, another alert. Ruiz's message. Courier's name is Collins. He's on the move. Last seen boarding a train to Brighton. I frowned. Brighton, an hour away, coastal, open escape. Get me to that station. I told Henry. He punched the address into his nav. We raced through London streets, weaving around black cabs and cyclists. My boots thudded on the platform as we arrived. At Victoria Station, the train to Brighton still hissed steam at the platform. Ruiz met us there, breathless. He's gone. But he left this. He handed me a small USB drive. I plugged it into my phone's microadapter. Inside, encrypted files. Labeled FX09, contract. Financial transactions, Marisol had predicted. But whose? I tapped open the first file, and the screen filled with names. Clients, board members, executives. Corruption, bribery, insider data, a dossier of crimes, linked to Firth's fixer and a network of powerful partners, people I'd once trusted. Evidence. Enough to dismantle empires, or to unleash chaos. My breath caught. This wasn't just revenge. This was war. And I held the detonator. I slipped the USB into my coat pocket just as the Brighton train's doors began to close. I leapt aboard. Lungs burning. Inside, empty seats waited under fluorescent lights. I collapsed into one, heart racing. I had Firth's fixer in sight, the regulator on my side, and evidence that could level London's highest towers. But that power came at a cost. Outside, the rails curved toward the coast, and I realized some truths, once unleashed, could never be contained. The train lurched into motion, and my world shifted on its axis, because the next choice would define me. Not as a daughter, not as a financier, but as the architect of fate itself. To be continued. The train rattled along the coastal line, each click of the wheels a countdown to a decision I could not postpone. I sat with the USB drive burning a hole in my coat pocket, its tiny chip containing enough secrets to topple boardrooms, destroy reputations, and reshape entire markets. Outside the window, the winter sea stretched into a leaden expanse, waves cresting beneath steel skies. Brighton Station would be my first choice, a place to regroup, to plan, to decide if I was willing to wield this power, or if doing so would make me the monster I had fought so hard never to become. My phone buzzed. Elliot. I silenced it, heart pounding. I needed a moment alone. The carriage was empty except for me and a folded newspaper someone must have left behind. Its headline read, "Morgan Scandal Averted. Regulator Clears Financial Strategist." I crumpled it and tossed it onto the seat, as if rejecting false congratulations. They had praised the exoneration, unaware that a deeper storm was brewing. The regulator's liaison would soon discover the metadata trail Elliot and Marisol had supplied, vindicating me completely, or so I hoped. But the fixer's dossier threatened to append everything. If I unleashed those files, Firth's network of corruption would collapse under scrutiny. Clients would flee, shares would plummet, and countless high-stakes players would be exposed. I would strike first, showing no mercy, proving that betrayal carried consequences. Yet, in doing so, I would become judge and jury for an empire of shadows, a position that invited unimaginable backlash. I imagined midnight attacks on my career, threats to my safety, lawsuits so tangled I'd be fighting in courts for years. My Breath caught as the train slowed into Brighton station. The platform lights shimmered on the wet rails. I rose, shouldering my bag. This was where I would meet Ruiz, who had tracked the fixer's courier movements here. I needed his insight into Collins's next move. But first, I walked toward the station exit, boots echoing in the deserted concourse, mind racing through every scenario. I stepped into the chill, letting the damp air clear my thoughts. Brighton was quiet in mid-afternoon, a town between seasons, where tourists were sparse and the pier stood empty. I followed Ruiz's instructions to a small cafe near the waterfront, its sign faded. Inside, the faint scent of espresso mingled with salt and old awnings. He waited at a corner table, coat draped over his chair. "Calla," he said, voice low. "He's close. Collins isn't just a courier, he's a broker for high-value intel. He connects whistleblowers to black market buyers. His network spans Hong Kong to London. He's very careful." I perched on the edge of my chair. "Do you know where he'll be next?" He tapped his tablet. "Yes, he has a meeting tonight with a contact at an abandoned warehouse near Shoreham Harbor, the docks. He's transferring the dossier to a ship-bound handoff for overseas escape." My pulse spiked. "Then we intercept him there." Ruiz nodded. "I thought you'd say that." We left the cafe together, stepping into the damp streets. The sky had darkened. A coastal fog rolled in from the sea. The warehouse district lay half an hour's drive west, past factories and derelict gates. I slid into the passenger seat of Ruiz's unmarked sedan. Heart pounding as the headlights cut through mist-dot silence held us company until we reached the docks. The warehouse loomed, its boards lit by a single flickering lamp. A wooden dock stretched into the water, where a small fishing trawler bobbed against the black surface. We exited the car, moving with practiced stealth. Ruiz carried a suppressed pistol in his coat pocket. I kept my hand near my holster, legal for me in my private capacity. Though I rarely drew it. Inside, the air smelled of salt and rust. Boxes lay stacked in the shadows. I could see figures ahead, a tall man in a dark parka, the brim of his hat low, his back to us. He stood by a crate, carefully unlocking a case the size of a briefcase. My heart tightened. That had to be Collins, Ruiz gestured. We approached from opposite flanks. I held my breath as the man snapped the case open. Silver light from the lamp glinted off the USB I had put in my pocket. A flash, he froze, then spun. As I emerged, gun raised. "Stop," I commanded. "Don't move." Collins's eyes flicked between my weapon and Ruiz's holstered pistol. He raised his hand slowly. "Morgan," he said. His voice was smooth, ominous. "I wondered when you'd show up." "Your game's over," I said, breathing heavily. "Hand over the files." He laughed softly. "You don't understand. Those files are worth millions. You could destroy powerful men overnight." I tightened my grip. "That's the point. You betrayed me. You leaked my private filings. You tried to ruin my reputation." He shrugged. "Business is business. I deliver information, not morals." I took a step forward. "Then prove it. Show me the files." With a flick, he lifted a slim case from his coat. Inside, dozens of USBs labeled with corporate logos. He placed them on the crate. "Take them all, Calla. Release everyone. 48 hours, and you'll bring every crooked exec in London to their knees." I stared. The dilemma crushed me. Power hung in my hands like a blade. I thought of my mother, vulnerable in the hospital, waiting for me to choose family over retribution. I thought of Kendra, fragile hope flickering in her eyes during our reconciliation. And I thought of myself, no longer the frost queen in a glass tower, but someone who fought for her place in a world built on debt and leverage. I raised the pistol. "I'm done playing games." Collins's eyes narrowed. "Then finish this." I took a deep breath. The weight of the pistol felt heavy. I aimed not at him, but at the case. "Drop it." He hesitated, then let the case clatter onto the metal floor. I watched as the USBs scattered. "Stop!" he yelled. I fired. The bullet tore through the case, sending splinters flying. The USBs scattered into the water, sinking beneath the trawler's hull. I lowered the gun, shaking. Collins stared, a mix of admiration and fury in his gaze. "You just burned your leverage," he said softly. "I burned your weapon." My voice was low. "Now get out of my sight." He nodded slowly, then turned and walked into the fog, disappearing as silently as he had appeared. I exhaled, hands trembling. Ruiz stepped forward, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak. I watched the water ripple where the USBs sank out of sight. Power, once unleashed, could never be reclaimed. I had chosen to destroy it before it destroyed me. As I sheathed my pistol, I realized the war was not over. But the rules had changed, and I would never let anyone wield that power again. I watched the waves lap against the dock as dawn broke over Brighton, pale light shimmering on the water. The sea seemed indifferent to the drama we'd just played out in its depths, a reminder that life moved on, even when power struggles threatened to capsize us. I felt a quiet thrill running through me, tempered by exhaustion. The fixer had fled, the evidence destroyed, and Collins's network crippled. But the question simmered in my mind. Had I won, or merely delayed the reckoning? When Ruiz and I arrived, back at the inn, the corridors felt narrower, the air heavier. I filled a mug with tea and sat by the window, watching snowflakes drift down like confetti on a stage where the next act was yet to be written. Behind me, the inn stirred boards being swept, luggage wheeled in, staff exchanging morning greetings. Normalcy thrummed behind the fragile barrier of my resolve. I checked my messages. Jason had emailed about the Hastings file, and Isha pinged, "You okay? Haven't seen you since Christmas." I drafted a terse reply. "Fine, back Monday." I didn't add that my world had exploded at sea level. I didn't want pity, nor explanations. I was the Frost Queen again, armored, distant, impenetrable. But something in me had shifted. The power I'd refused had left an echo, a taste of something intoxicating and terrifying. In the courtroom, I wielded words. In the boardroom, spreadsheets. Beside the waves, I had held lives in my hands and then chosen to shatter that power rather than succumb to its seduction. I set the mug aside and pulled my coat from the rack. I needed air. I needed to think. The fresh dawn called outside. The inn's facade gleamed with frost. I walked to the edge of the grounds, where a narrow path wound to ford the cliffs above the sea. Each step crunched, a temporary path through an unsettled world. I climbed until I reached a lookout point, railings edged with ice. From here, the horizon stretched like a promise, limitless and unknowable. I leaned on the rail and let the wind whip my hair as if trying to scrub away the turmoil. What I needed now was clarity and to decide how to protect what I still had: my name, my reputation, and the fragile truce with my family. The regulatory probe was paused, but that could shift. The fixer's clients might retaliate. The legal battles with Firth were far from over. And Mum's health remained uncertain. The phone buzzed. A message from Kendra. "Mum's home. She asked for you." I closed my eyes. Family awaited. Redemption beckoned. But the final move still glimmered at the edge of my mind, a choice between total destruction of Firth's empire or stepping back to heal before striking again. A runner's footsteps startled me. A local jogger paused, offering a polite nod before continuing. I watched her go, light and unburdened. For a moment, I envied her. Then my phone rang. It was Elliot. "Calla," he said quietly, "we've intercepted a payment trail. Firth's fixer has moved offshore, but his clients are naming you in articles. They call you the Duchess of Debt. It's already circling." I clenched the rail. "So they're calling me." He hesitated. "Whatever you do next, do it fast." or you lose narrative control. I pressed my forehead to the cold metal. Meet me back at the suite in 30, I told him, and gather the team. He agreed, and the line went dead. I stood on the edge, feeling the weight of the sea beneath me and the storm inside me. The next decision would define the rest of my life. Returned to the inn, I retraced my steps. Mind racing. If I unleashed the corporate dossier I'd destroyed, I'd become an avenger, a reckoning that even my past self would fear. But if I held back, Firth and his allies would regroup, slinging mud until they buried me. Power once tasted, never felt the same to refuse it again. Back at the suite, I found my team gathered around the table. Maps and financial charts were spread like battle plans. Henry looked up, eyes sharp. "You've seen the headlines," he began. I nodded. "They're shaping the story. We need to own the narrative and fast." Ruiz added, "Firth's fixer resurfaced in the Cayman filings. He's pouring money into a shell charity. He's laundering it." Marisol's tablet pinged. "I've pulled the metadata from the latest smear articles. The source traces back to a PR firm linked to one of Firth's board members." My decision crystallized. "Then we expose them," I said. "Not with leaked files, but with the facts. We'll unmask the charity as a front, link it to their assets, and call in the authorities. We'll release a statement under our firm's letterhead proof, names, dates. We'll show that Firth's network is corrupt, but we won't play their game. We'll do it cleanly, legally, and with public scrutiny." There was a hush. Henry smiled. "That's elegant," Marisol nodded. "They can't spin that." Ruiz leaned forward. "We'll need to move quick. Their web is tangled, but once we cut a strand, it unravels." I took a deep breath. "Then let's cut." Phone. Screens lit as they executed the plan. I watched them, my soldiers in this war. One never asked for as they worked. I sat back and closed my eyes, feeling the echo of earlier power, now tempered by purpose. I was done being a pawn. I was something else now, a queen in a kingdom of debt and retribution, but also a protector of truth. Outside, the wind howled. I opened my eyes. The storm was about to break. Minutes later, the first press release went out. Social media blew up. Investigative journalists sharpened their pens. Regulators prepared subpoenas. Firth's charity squealed under scrutiny, and board members began distancing themselves. I watched the unfolding chaos, heart pounding. This was a dot and then a text from Mum. "You've made me proud." I pressed my thumb to the screen, savored the warmth. Because this Christmas, I'd reclaimed more than a holiday invitation. I'd reclaimed myself. And as the headlines blared around me, I whispered to the empty room, "Welcome to my world." The morning after our public strike was a study in paradox. The inn's common room hummed with hushed conversation, but I felt detached, as if watching a play through a glass barrier. My phone buzzed incessantly. Media requests, regulator inquiries, familial check-ins. I muted the notifications and took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to smile. Our plan had worked. Firth was reeling. High-profile resignations littered the newspapers. The charity's bank accounts were frozen. Regulators had opened formal investigations, but power rarely leaves without a price. I slipped on a coat and went for a walk along the seaside promenade. The air was crisp, the sky a pale wash. A few joggers and dog walkers passed, oblivious to the corporate war zone I'd unleashed. It struck me how small human conflicts seemed against the vast expanse of water. Yet, I knew that for many, that war had life-altering consequences. I needed perspective. I needed to remember why I'd started this fight. For my mother, for my sister, for the right to a seat at the table in my own life, not just someone else's ledger. A text from Aisha popped up. Board meeting in an hour. Hastings projections. Need final sign-off. I hesitated. Business as usual or bow out. I typed back, on my way. Walking back, I passed the dock where I destroyed the USBs. Snow had melted, and the water lapped quietly. The scene was almost serene, but I remembered the panic, the flash of my pistol, Collins's smirk as he walked away. That moment felt distant but real, a testament to the lengths I'd go. Back at the inn, I gathered my documents and called Henry. "Can you join the Hastings call? I need backup." Of course. At the top of the hour, I dialed in. The usual faces appeared. On my laptop screen, Jason, Aisha, the board. Their questions were routine: market risks, revenue forecasts, synergy evaluations. And for a moment, I forgot the chaos outside. But then Jason's screen flashed a news alert behind him. He cleared his throat. "Kala, are you okay? There's a lot of talk about the regulatory findings. Is there anything we need to know?" I paused, measuring my words. "We've addressed the issue publicly. Our findings stand. The inquiry confirmed unauthorized leaks from third parties, and I'm confident in our compliance protocols. Let's stay focused on Hastings." They nodded, returning to projections. Aisha passed me a thumbs up in the corner of the screen. I exhaled. That afternoon I received a call from my mother. "Your sister and I are coming to London," she said. "We'd like to celebrate with you." My heart fluttered. I'd like that. As I hung up, the room felt warmer. I realized I hadn't worked for revenge alone. I'd fought for belonging, for recognition, for family. The sun lowered as I stepped outside again, phone tucked away. The inn had become a crossroads between who I was and who I wanted to be. I closed my eyes and let the breeze carry away the remnants of battle. This Christmas had begun with exclusion and ended with reunion in sight. I touched my brooch, a symbol of legacy, and smiled. The final chapters of this story weren't written in courtrooms or headlines. They were waiting at a family table, beneath twinkling lights, where forgiveness and love awaited, and I was ready to take my place. The sky over London was draped in slate gray when I stepped off the Eurostar and into St. Pancras Station. A cold drizzle clung to the air, and the city's lights gleamed like beacons through the haze. My heart thrummed with anticipation and a hint of nervousness. I was returning not just from a strategic victory, but to a new chapter of connection. I hailed a black cab and settled into the back seat. The driver gave a curt nod. I watched the streets blur by tourists clutching umbrellas, taxis streaming red and white, neon signs flickering reflections on wet pavements. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. When the cab climbed into the neighborhood where our family flat still stood, I felt a rush of memories. The red brick facade, the flowering window boxes in spring, the echo of laughter in the hallway. The cab stopped in front of the building, and I paid the fare. Stepping onto the damp pavement and drawing the collar of my coat up against the chill. Inside, the lobby smelled of aged carpet and citrus polish. I buzzed my apartment number. The door clicked open, and I climbed the stairs 2 at a time. Outside my door, I paused. My hand hovered over the brass knob, heart racing with simple hope. I knocked and entered. My mother and sister stood in the living room, their silhouettes outlined by fairy lights strung around the window. A small Christmas tree glowed softly in the corner, and a fire crackled in the hearth. The room smelled of cinnamon and pine. They turned as I entered. In that moment, the distance of months vanished. Mom's eyes glistened. Kenva rushed forward, wrapping me in a hug so fierce I felt her tears against my neck. "I missed you," she whispered. "I missed you both," I managed, voice thick. We pulled apart, and my mother stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Kala, welcome home." Her voice trembled with sincerity. I took her hand, feeling the warmth of her palm. The evening unfolded in a comforting blur. We sat at the small dining table, sharing a simple meal of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and Brussels sprouts. We laughed over childhood anecdotes, Mom's disastrous attempt at homemade crackers that exploded in the oven, Our school nativity play fiasco. Then Kendra set down her fork. We have one gift left, she said. Mom handed me a slender envelope. My name was scrawled in Mom's handwriting. I opened it to find 2 plane tickets to Surrey and a note. Family is where we begin. Let's finish the story together. I looked up, tears welling. Thank you, I whispered. They smiled. As darkness deepened outside, we exchanged gifts, small tokens of love. My mother gave me a leather-bound journal, its pages empty and waiting. Kendra handed me a framed photo of the 3 of us on Grandma's front porch, all of us smiling. I held the photo close. I promise, no more silence. They nodded. Later, after the dishes were cleared, we curled up on the couch under a blanket. Outside, the city hummed with traffic and distant laughter. Inside, our hearts beat in time with the fire, I realized. Then that reclamation wasn't just about freezing a mortgage or defeating a corrupt network. It was about reclaiming love, trust, connection. And this chapter, this homecoming, was only the beginning. Tomorrow, we would face whatever came next. Together. Dawn broke over the River Thames in a pale wash of pink and silver, the city yawning awake with a steady pulse of horns and footsteps. I stood at the window of our family flat, cradling a mug of strong coffee in both hands. Steam rose and fragile. Ribbons mingling with the faint fragrance of Sophie's Fields Bakery from the street below. Beside me, my mother and sister stirred over breakfast in the kitchen, eggs sizzling, toast popping, the comforting sound of a home alive. After weeks on the defensive, caught in a maelstrom of corporate warfare and family reckoning, this morning felt like a fragile gift. I turned away from the window and stepped into the kitchen. My mother caught my eye and offered a smile that reached all the way to her fingertips before settling in her eyes. Mom, Kendra, I need to tell you something, I said, setting my mug on the counter. My voice felt firm, clear, no hint of frost or steel. They paused, turning to me. The sizzling stopped like a record scratched, and for a moment, the only sound was my heartbeat. What is it, love? My mother asked. I took a deep breath. It's about Firth. Their expressions sharpened concern, curiosity, guarded hope. They'd been through the worst of my battles, but few details had passed between us. Only fragments, legal freeze, regulatory probe, corruption network. Now I would tell them everything. I moved to the small kitchen table and sat, watching their faces. Kendra placed 2 cups of tea in front of us. The steam carried a promise. You're safe here, I began. I explained how Firth, my former partner, had orchestrated the leaks to ruin me. First the court documents, then the personal filings, and finally the smear campaign. I told them about the regulatory inquiry, the public exoneration, how I had worked with my team to craft a narrative that would protect my professional standing. And then I described the night at Shoreham Harbor, the fog, the battered warehouse. The moment Collins held the fate of some of the most powerful in his gloved hand. I expected shock. I expected horror. But what I saw instead was something I hadn't dared hope for. Pride. We never realized how dangerous it got. Kendra whispered, her hand finding mine across the table. I felt her fingers trembling. That plastic envelope on the mat was just the beginning, my mother said, her voice steady but low. I only saw the threats. I didn't know you had the strength to push back. I nodded. I thought I needed to be hard, relentless, so they'd never hurt us again. But I almost lost myself in that fight. They exchanged a look, an unspoken conversation that passed between them like a current. Kendra and I talked, my mother continued. We want to help. Not just by offering apologies, but by standing alongside you. Tears pricked my eyes. I don't know what that would look like. First, Kendra said, we need to secure the flat. The board members you exposed, they might try anything. Security, cameras, new locks, we should be ready. I nodded, feeling a weight lift as the plan materialized. Yes, security. Second, my mother said, I want to invest in your work. Whatever you build next will be partners." My chest tightened with emotion. "Mom!" "No more holding back," she snapped gently. "We're in this together." I reached across the table and took both their hands. Together. We spent the morning drafting lists security firms, legal documents to file, press statements to prepare if more smears appeared. It was empowering to collaborate, to bridge the gap between the corporate world I inhabited and the familial bonds I'd feared irreparable. By afternoon, the city had warmed to a soft gray light, and we took a walk along the south bank, the Lego-themed. Riverboats glided by, ducks dabbled near the shore, and a street performer played an accordion tune that echoed off the underpass. Tourists snapped photos. Londoners on their lunch break chatted in brisk accents. Normalcy reigned, but I saw it with new eyes. A city alive with possibility. My phone buzzed. Elliot. "Calla, we have a new development," he said. "Firth's fixer surfaced in Milan last night. He's meeting someone at the Navigli district. Could be the paper trail. If we move fast, we might get more info." I looked at my mother and sister, walking beside me. They paused, sensing the gravity. "I have to go," I said. They nodded, understanding. "Be careful," Kendra said, her hand on my arm. "I will," I promised, pocketing the phone. We hugged. At Embankment Station, then I rushed down the escalator to the underground. The train arrived, packed with commuters. I squeezed on and held the pole, weaving through the crowd until I found a spot near the doors. The carriage lurched forward, and I steadied my breath. As the train rattled toward Paddington, I thought about Milan, the canals at sunset, the labyrinth of cobblestone streets, the rendezvous that awaited. Firth's fixer was resourceful. I had to be faster. A notification flashed on my screen. An encrypted message from Marisol. I tapped it. Preliminary data from Milan. Fixer is not traveling alone. Unknown accomplice, likely an insider from Firth's board. Unknown identity. My pulse quickened. The unknown accomplice could derail everything. If they realized we were onto them, they'd vanish. The train screeched into Paddington, and the doors slid open. I stepped off, my coat billowing. I navigated the crowd through the station, weaving past luggage trolleys and tourists with rail maps. Outside, the cab rank bustled. I flagged down a black cab, my #1 rule for security, and gave the driver the Milan airport address. The driver frowned. "You're in a hurry?" he asked. "Yes," I said, checking my watch. He nodded and we pulled away, tires hissing on wet pavement. In the rearview mirror, I caught my reflection, a woman transformed. Determined, but not unscarred. I typed a message to Kendra. "Don't wait up. I'll call when safe. I love you both." I hit send before he could question me further. The cab sped toward Heathrow. I closed my eyes, summoning focus. Milan awaited, not just another battlefield, but a chance to unearth the last piece of the puzzle. And if I uncovered the accomplice, then it would be time to end this war once and for all. The cab's headlights reflected off the wet tarmac, stretching into the dark horizon. I checked my phone again. The message from Marisol. Accomplice confirmed. Name, Laurent Vardon. I exhaled, Laurent Vardon. The name meant nothing to me yet, but soon everything would change. Because this Christmas saga wasn't over until the last name was written in the snow dot, and Milan's canals glowed with promises of revelation. The flight from Heathrow to Milan slid through clouds in a corridor of pale dawn. I sat by the window, the city lights receding beneath the wing before the world opened into endless sky. In my lap, a leather journal lay open with scribbled notes, dates, names, code phrases, all pointing to Laurent Vardon. Marisol's intel had revealed he was the link between Firth's fixer and the last vestiges of the smear campaign that threatened my professional and personal life. I closed the journal and looked around the cabin. Business travelers flipped through newspapers. Families dozed. None of them knew how close they were to my war. I exhaled, steeling myself. This was the final act. My phone buzzed. A secure message from Elliot. Hotel booked near Duomo. Key meeting tonight at 8 p.m. He'll request transfer of funds. I typed back. Understood. Meeting confirmed. I'll be there. Landing gear rattled. As we descended into Milan's Malpensa airport, the air was sharp with winter chill. I collected my bag, a dark leather satchel containing essentials, passport, wallet, and the pistol I'd sworn never to draw again. A black sedan waited curbside. The driver greeted me by name and loaded my bag into the trunk. I slid into the back seat and gave the hotel's address. The streets of Milan glowed with holiday light streets I'd once walked as a child with my mother, marveling at nativity scenes and echoing cathedrals. But this journey was of a different nature. At the Hotel del Nazione, I ascended to a second floor, suite overlooking a quiet courtyard. I placed my journal and keys on the desk and checked the time, 6:15 p.m., 2 hours until the showdown. My phone buzzed again. Marisol, I've traced Vardan's phone pings to a cafe behind the Duomo. Best place for initial contact. I dressed methodically, tailored black trousers, charcoal blouse, and a knee-length coat with a tailored collar. On my wrist, my late grandmother's silver hawthorn brooch glinted beneath the cuff. I strapped my bag across my body and tucked my pistol beneath my coat, out of sight, but within reach. At 7 p.m., I slipped into the chilled air and hailed a taxi. The driver's radio murmured Italian news reports, protests in City Hall, holiday markets, and a local storm warning. I watched the Duomo's spires emerge from the glow of street lamps as we turned into Piazza del Duomo. I paid and walked toward the cafe that Marisol had marked. Its tables were arranged on a narrow terrace, each illuminated by a lantern. I spotted a lone figure in a dark parka, hunched at a corner table. Laurent Vardan. He looked up as I approached. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He closed his laptop and rose. We paused at the edge of his table as snowflakes drifted onto the cobblestones. "Ms. Morgan," he said, voice calm, but his eyes betrayed tension. "I didn't expect to see you here." I pulled out the journal and placed it between us. "Start talking." He took a seat and motioned for me to join. I slid into the chair opposite him. "I have a simple question," I said, leaning forward. "Why target me?" He swallowed. "Because you got in the way. Latent ambition is dangerous. You disturbed balances that feed into billions." "Those balances were corrupt," I replied. "You were the linchpin. You traded influence for profit at the expense of transparency and trust. I was the one who exposed it." He smiled thinly. "Exposed? Or threatened? There's a difference. A difference that defines integrity." He studied me. "I arranged for Vogan Firth's fixer to release the documents. The smear campaign, the regulator, the threats. It was all part of a scenario to pressure you out and install someone more malleable." I felt anger surge. "And you thought you could destroy me with lies?" "Not lies," he said. "Half-truths, omissions. In high finance, perception is reality." I drew in a breath. "That ends now." He leaned back. "What will you do?" I looked around the terrace. Patrons murmured in Italian as waiters passed trays of espresso and pastries. Beyond, the Duomo's marble facade stood silent and eternal. I opened my bag and slid out my phone. On the screen was a prepared statement, along with a selection of encrypted files. Marisol had prepared financial records, bank statements, email chains, proof of Vardan's collusion with Firth and the board members. I tapped send on a secure channel to Henry, who would immediately distribute it to international press, regulators in London, New York, and Milan, and every major financial news outlet. Vardan's eyes widened as he recognized the file names. "You wouldn't dare," he whispered. I hit send. Within seconds, his phone buzzed. He checked it and muttered, "Impossible." The lantern's flame flickered as a gust of wind swept through the piazza. Snow whipped across the table. "What I dare," I said softly, "is expose you for what you are." He rose, face ashen. "You'll regret this. Not today." I stood and buttoned my coat. "Today, you answer for your choices." I left a tip on the table and stepped into the night. Behind me, Vardan fled into the crowd. Near the Duomo, his silhouette vanished into a side alley. I heard sirens in the distance. Local regulators had received the tip, and Milan police were on their way. I walked toward the cathedral, its grand doors open in silent invitation. I stood at the threshold, marble floors cool beneath my boots. Inside, the frescoed ceiling soared, and the candlelight glowed in the hush. I paused in the nave, letting the solemnity ground me. I closed my eyes and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for my grandmother's memory, for the team who fought alongside me, and for the father and mother I'd reclaimed. Outside, the Milan night thrummed with wind and distant church bells. I stepped back onto the piazza, the reporters already gathering. I crossed my arms, prepared to face the questions that would secure my final victory. And as the cameras flashed, I felt something profound, not triumph, but peace, because this story, my story, was not just about power. It was about claiming my place, defending my truth, and preserving my love. And now, as the world watched, I offered the next chapter, the life I would build beyond revenge. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.